The Galactic Academy of Interstellar Studies hovered in the void between three star systems, a testament to neutrality that fooled absolutely no one. A 12-pointed crystalline structure that supposedly represented the founding species, though rumor had it the Veltraxians demanded the extra points just to one-up the Javididians. The place practically screamed diplomatically significant in architecture alone. Honored students, please calibrate your universal translators to academic formality setting Theta 9, droned Administrator Fleek, a gelatinous mass of neural tissue suspended in a hovering exoshell. The orientation hall buzzed with the clicking, chirping, and occasional wet squelching sounds of 200 diverse species adjusting their devices. Among them stood Ren Harlow, 5 feet 7 inches of unremarkable human with remarkable bad luck. 3 humans had been selected for this exchange program, but naturally the others were assigned to the diplomatic corps and xenobiology wings. Ren got political theory and military history. Perfect. Welcome to the most prestigious learning institution in 7 galactic sectors, continued Fleek, whose species apparently evolved without the concept of engaging public speaking, where the children of ambassadors, planetary governors, and military strategists come to forge the future of our collective civilizations. Translation: a dumping ground for elite offspring too mediocre for real power back home, but too well connected to ignore. The orientation continued with mind-numbing bureaucratic detail while Ren observed her new classmates. The quadrupedal Nix Hovens clustered together, their iridescent feather scales rippling with chromatic communications too subtle for translator tech. Several Toric students, hulking reptilians with natural armor plating, positioned themselves strategically around the exits. Old military habits died hard, especially for a species currently occupying 17 disputed systems near the front. A cluster of Meridian students floated slightly above their seats, their crystalline bodies refracting light in patterns that made Ren's eyes water. Apex predators of the information ecosystem, Meridians practically invented espionage before developing space travel. The Academy Handbook had warned about the complex hierarchies. Species with ancient spacefaring histories looked down on emergent civilizations. Resource-rich planets commanded more respect than colony worlds. Military strength trumped cultural achievements, and humans, barely 2 centuries into faster-than-light travel, from a backwater solar system with minimal strategic value, ranked somewhere between quaint curiosity and potential lab specimen. The news feeds embedded in the hall's walls silently displayed galactic headlines. Border skirmishes between the Turkmeni and the Meridian confluence have escalated again. The Veltraxian Republic has suspended trade with 3 neutral systems suspected of harboring Javididian operatives. Rin's side thought it was going to be one hell of a semester, with emphasis on hell. Her last thought before Administrator Fleek finally stopped speaking. At least humans were too insignificant to get dragged into whatever cosmic chess match was unfolding. How wrong she was. 2 standard cycles into the semester, and Ren had already managed to commit 3 major cultural faux pas. Flood her dormitory with oxygen-enriched atmosphere, apparently toxic to her Mathonian neighbor, and spectacularly fail a simple 4-dimensional calculus exam. The Academy's much-touted adaptive learning systems seem to have a blind spot for human cognitive architecture. The temporal perception limitation of your species is not the Academy's responsibility, explained Professor Zix, whose 12 eyes blinked asynchronously in what Ren had learned was amusement. Perhaps you should pursue studies more aligned with human capabilities. Have you considered primitive artistic expression? The coursework was brutal by design. Military history with Commander Voss, an 8-limbed Turic veteran whose idea of a pop quiz involved simulated planetary invasions with real-time casualty calculations. Xenopolitical theory with Professor Yilk, a Meridian scholar who expected students to track political developments across 67 star systems simultaneously. Quantum communications, taught by a collective consciousness of microscopic entities that occupied a hovering terrarium and frequently forgot that individual beings couldn't split their attention across multiple dimensions. The Academy dining hall resembled a bizarre ecological experiment gone wrong. Each species required specific atmospheric conditions, temperature ranges, and nutritional inputs. Wren's meal card entitled her to synthesized approximations of Earth cuisine, which the automated systems consistently got almost, but not quite, right. Today's hamburger had the consistency of vulcanized rubber and tasted vaguely of battery acid. Your facial musculature suggests disappointment with your nutrient delivery, observed Keeksia, a Nix-Hoven student with feather scales that shifted into analytical patterns. One of the few classmates who regularly acknowledged Wren's existence, Keeksia seemed fascinated by human emotional expressions. Is the chemical composition incorrect? The chemical composition suggests it was manufactured in an industrial lubricant facility, Wren muttered, poking the food suspiciously. Across the hall, the Meridian students hovered at their designated table, their crystalline bodies pulsing with complex light patterns as they absorbed ambient radiation instead of consuming physical matter. At the far end, a group of Toric military cadets were engaged in what appeared to be a friendly game, but involved holographic battle scenarios and occasional triumphant roars. Enkvor, the most intimidating of the Toric students, caught Wren looking and narrowed his vertical pupils. "Human," he rumbled, an invitation that felt more like a summons. "Observe this tactical problem. Your kind's historical warfare was primitive but occasionally innovative." The table fell silent as Wren approached. The holographic display showed a planetary defense scenario with overwhelming forces against a smaller, entrenched opponent. The Torics had deployed a conventional assault pattern that any first-year military student would recognize. Drawing on her inexplicable childhood obsession with historical Earth conflicts, Wren suggested a flanking maneuver inspired by a centuries-old human battle. The Torics exchanged glances, their scaled brows furrowing. "Interesting," Enk finally said, the word clearly a dismissal. "Antiquated, but interesting." Walking away, Wren didn't notice how quickly they modified their holographic strategy to incorporate elements of her suggestion, nor the thoughtful look that passed between them. In xenolinguistics, the translator devices regularly failed to capture the nuances of multi-tonal languages or pheromone-based communication supplements. This left Wren at a distinct disadvantage during debates where the Meridian students particularly excelled. "The human appears confused," observed Trill, a Meridian student whose crystalline structure refracted light in patterns that gave Wren headaches. Perhaps concepts beyond binary thinking are challenging for carbon-based neural systems. What none of them realized was that Wren's frustration had led to an improvised solution. She'd modified her standard-issue translator using techniques from Earth's pre-space history of coding and pattern recognition. The Academy-issued devices processed official languages through approved algorithms. Wren's jury-rigged system captured raw data and looked for meaningful patterns, a crude but effective approach that sometimes caught subtleties the official translations missed. It wasn't much, but in a place where she was constantly reminded of human inadequacy, it was something. A small talent that seemed utterly insignificant in the grand scheme of galactic politics. The Academy's grand atrium hummed with tension as news feeds displayed across floating holographic panels. "Diplomatic channels severed," announced the Galactic Standard headlines. Toric hegemony recalls ambassadors from Meridian confluence. Smaller headlines scrolled beneath. Veltraxian Republic declares neutrality while mobilizing fleet. Javididian resources embargoed in 16 systems. "Well, isn't this just splendid?" Wren muttered to herself. "Nothing like interstellar conflict to liven up exam season." The Academy administration issued immediate statements reaffirming its neutrality. Announcements met with skepticism by the increasingly fractious student body. Overnight, the careful integration of species disintegrated as students clustered with their political allies. In the dining hall, the meridian table now pulsed with aggressive light patterns that caused mild radiation burns on any non-meridian who ventured too close. The toric students had rearranged their seating into what was clearly a defensive formation, backs to the wall, eyes scanning constantly. Various minor species scrambled to align themselves with potential protectors. Professor Yilk's xenopolitical theory class had transformed from theoretical debate into thinly veiled propaganda battles. The toric expansion policy clearly violates Section 72B of the Galactic Concordance, insisted a Meridian student, its crystalline form flashing with indignation. The Confluence's economic strangulation of developing systems is the true violation, countered Enkfor, his armored scales flaring. Your kind has always hidden aggression behind bureaucracy. Wren sat in diplomatic no-man's land, a representative of a species too insignificant to have chosen sides. This unexpectedly made her a confidant for several classmates seeking neutral perspective, though neutral increasingly meant, "Tell me my side is right." The carbon-based perceives the situation without crystalline bias, Trill told her cluster of Meridian peers, light patterns suggesting they were discussing Wren. Its observations may have anthropological value. Not to be outdone, Enk cornered Wren after class. "Human, your species fought primitive but numerous wars. You understand the necessity of preemptive strikes against existential threats." "That's a wildly reductive view of human military history," Wren replied, uncomfortable with his looming presence. Kixir, whose own species maintained careful neutrality, fell into step beside Wren as they left the dining hall. "Your position grows precarious," the Nixhoven observed, feather scales shifting to concerned patterns. "Minor species are being pressured to declare allegiances. Earth barely registers in this conflict," Wren pointed out. "Precisely why both factions may see you as exploitable. Vulnerable species become proxies in conflicts between powers." The breaking point came during Commander Voss's military history class. The topic, asymmetrical warfare between technologically mismatched civilizations. "The superior force must employ overwhelming advantage immediately," Enk argued, bringing up historical examples from conflicts where toric forces had crushed lesser developed worlds. "Hesitation merely extends suffering. Distributed resistance networks can mathematically exhaust occupation forces through attrition," countered Trill, the Meridian student. "The crystalline consciousness prevails through persistence where brute force fails." Tension crackled between them as Commander Voss encouraged the escalating academic debate. The simulation displayed increasingly destructive scenarios, civilian casualties mounting as theoretical arguments became thinly veiled threats. "This is ridiculous," Wren finally interrupted, earning surprised looks from classmates unused to human outbursts. "You're both ignoring fundamental principles of conflict resolution. Enlighten us with primitive human wisdom." Trill's voice dripped with derision. Wren accessed the simulation controls, fingers flying across the interface. "You're both assuming resource capture is the goal, but historically, the most successful occupations weren't about destroying infrastructure or breaking resistance through force." She adjusted parameters, showing how focusing exclusively on military targets left civilian populations hostile, creating endless insurgency. Then she demonstrated alternative approaches from Earth history, cultural integration, infrastructure development, cooperative governance. The most effective conquests in human history weren't about destroying the enemy, she explained. They were about making occupation more beneficial than resistance. The room fell silent. Commander Voss's multiple eyes rose in what might have been surprise. "An interesting perspective," the commander finally said. "Perhaps there is value in studying even primitive conflicts." Ren caught the dismissive edge in his voice, but also noticed something else. Enk and several other Torics were quietly downloading her simulation parameters, while Trill's crystalline structure had shifted to a pattern Ren's modified translator interpreted as thoughtful reassessment. As class ended, the newsfeed updated. Toric vessels crossed disputed boundary. Meridian defense grid activated. The Academy's pride and joy was its practical diplomacy arena, a massive adaptive environment chamber where students participated in simulated negotiations under various planetary conditions. Today's exercise, resource allocation negotiations in a high-gravity, methane-rich atmosphere. Just another Tuesday at Galactic Kindergarten for the elite. "Remember," intoned Administrator Fleek through the communication system, "this simulation is designed to build cross-cultural cooperation skills. Your performance will account for 30% of your diplomatic certification." Ren adjusted her environmental suit while eyeing the faction-based seating arrangement. The Academy staff had naively, or perhaps optimistically, mixed rival species together at each negotiation pod, because nothing solves simmering interstellar tensions like forcing hormonal adolescents from warring factions to share breathing space. "The human will record outcomes," announced Enkvor, not bothering to address Ren directly. "Its species has no stake in these negotiations." The Toric student's environment suit was modified with additional armor plating, technically against simulation guidelines, but no one was brave enough to point this out. "Acceptable," agreed Trill, the Meridian student, whose crystalline form glowed ominously through a specialized containment field. "Carbon-based observation may provide neutral documentation." Ren bit back a retort about being referred to in the third person while sitting right there. Her role as designated note-taker was clearly a diplomatic bone thrown to keep the real players happy. She activated her modified translator, catching subtle communications her standard-issue device would have missed. The simulation began with a scenario involving limited deuterium supplies on a contested border world. Within minutes, theoretical discussion devolved into thinly veiled accusations. "The hegemony's protection claims are transparent resource theft," Trill's translation came through, while Ren's modified device caught the additional light pattern message to other Meridians. "Position for information advantage. Deploy countermeasures." Enk's scales flared. "The Confluence has sabotaged 3 development projects through regulatory manipulation." His subvocal communication to fellow Torics, barely caught by Ren's enhanced translator. "Defensive positions. Prepare contingencies." A priority alert flashed across all communication channels. "Hostilities confirmed in Veltraxian sector. Meridian outpost. Dyro 7 destroyed. Toric Krell under attack." The simulation chamber erupted into chaos. A Meridian student shattered their containment field, sending crystalline shards flying, a move that would be merely dramatic on their homeworld, but was legitimately dangerous in mixed company. A Toric response team instantly deployed personal shields that expanded to cover their allies. "This facility remains neutral territory," Administrator Fleek's panicked voice echoed. "Stand down immediately." Nobody was listening. Across the chamber, other species scrambled to declare allegiances or neutrality. A Javidian student activated some kind of sonic disruptor. Two Nixhovens created a barricade using simulation furniture. The faculty representatives moved to intervene, but were quickly overwhelmed as students accessed the simulation controls, altering environmental conditions to favor their physiologies. "Emergency protocols engaged," announced the Academy's central system. Blast doors sealed the chamber as atmospheric conditions went haywire, oxygen levels plummeting in some sectors, gravity fluctuating wildly in others. Wren found herself pinned behind an overturned negotiation table as Enk organized Toric students into a defensive perimeter. "Secure the environmental controls," he ordered. "Adjust atmosphere to Type G composition." Across the chamber, Trill coordinated Meridian students. "Deploy radiation fields. Disrupt their communication frequencies." The faculty's override attempts were being blocked somehow. Both factions had prepared for this scenario, installing countermeasures that suggested this was no spontaneous conflict. "The human is a potential intelligence asset," Wren overheard a Toric officer cadet say. "Secure it for questioning." "The carbon entity has observed our tactical responses," a Meridian countered. "It must be contained." "Great. From insignificant note-taker to valuable prisoner in 5 minutes flat." Wren checked her environmental suit's oxygen levels. 40 minutes remaining before she'd need to find an oxygen-rich pocket or a supply station. "You, human." A faculty member, a Veltraxian professor whose name Wren couldn't recall, crawled toward her position. "We need to reach the emergency override. The students have locked out standard faculty access." "Why tell me?" "I'm just a human," Wren replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Precisely. None of their security protocols will be calibrated for human biometrics. You're the only one who might slip through." Somewhere across the chamber, a localized explosive device detonated, likely from the purely academic weapons design course. The Veltraxian professor's eyes widened in panic. This is no longer a student protest. There are actual paramilitary factions among the student body. They've been planning this for months. Wren peered over the barricade. The chamber had transformed into an actual battlefield, with distinct territories, improvised weapons, and what appeared to be pre-positioned supply caches. The Meridians had established a blinding light field that created a natural barrier, while the Torics had formed an armored phalanx around the main environmental controls. A stray energy pulse hit nearby, showering them with debris. The professor was struck and slumped unconscious, leaving Wren alone with the chaos building around her. "Just a human," she muttered to herself, checking her suit integrity. "That might be the only advantage I've got left." The immediate problem was survival, specifically not dying in a war that wasn't hers. The secondary problem was somehow diffusing a centuries-old conflict that had erupted in her classroom, all in a day's work for an exchange student from a primitive world. Wren assessed her assets. One environmental suit with 38 minutes of oxygen remaining. A modified translator capturing communications from both sides. The dubious advantage of being underestimated by everyone in the room. "Oh, and an unconscious professor who just handed me a mission impossible." "Right," she muttered. "Emergency override. Just need to cross an active battlefield, hack into an alien security system, and not get vaporized by either side. Piece of cake." Her first move was distinctly human. She crawled beneath the negotiation tables, staying low while both factions focused on their dramatic posturing above. The Toric's evolutionary history as apex predators made them scan for movement at eye level, while the Meridian's crystalline sensory systems were optimized for energy signatures stronger than a single human could emit. When she reached the supply station, Wren executed the second part of her hastily formed plan. She accessed her student account and pulled up her disastrous four-dimensional calculus exam from the first week. Please tell me Professor Zix didn't change the default password, she whispered, entering the override sequence she'd accidentally glimpsed when the 12-eyed professor had logged in to demonstrate a problem. The terminal flashed green. Sometimes failing spectacularly has its advantages. With faculty credentials, she could access environmental controls, not enough to override the lockdown, but enough to create localized atmospheric disruptions. Time for some creative misapplication of her xenobiology studies. Wren programmed a sequence of rapid atmospheric shifts, nothing lethal, but highly disorienting to specific physiologies. Near the toric position, increased oxygen levels that would make their normally precise movements slightly sluggish. Around the meridian stronghold, modified radiation wavelengths that would interfere with their communication patterns. As the changes took effect, confusion spread through both camps. Wren used the distraction to move toward the central control hub, downloading Academy security protocols to her personal device as she went. What she needed next was a diversion, something unexpected that would draw attention away from her approach. Humans were often mocked for their inefficient educational system that required students to study multiple disciplines rather than specializing early. Right now, that inefficiency was her greatest strength. Wren accessed the Academy's library database with her borrowed credentials and quickly located what she needed: detailed schematics of the simulation chamber's sound system, originally designed for multi-species communication testing. "Let's see how everyone likes a taste of Earth diplomacy," she murmured, programming a sequence that would activate in 30 seconds. She slipped behind a maintenance panel and held her breath as the chamber speakers suddenly blasted a cacophony of sounds, each specifically calibrated to the hearing range and cultural significance of different species. For torics, it mimicked the territorial challenge of rival alpha predators. For meridians, it replicated the dissonance patterns used in their ancient wars. Each sound was designed not to harm, but to trigger instinctive primordial responses. In the moment of collective disorientation, Wren sprinted across the open floor to the emergency systems hub. Her fingers flew across the interface, applying a hybrid approach to the security protocols. The Academy's systems were designed to resist sophisticated hacking attempts, but had no defenses against human-style brute force, combined with intuitive pattern recognition. Another primitive approach that proved unexpectedly effective. "System access granted," the terminal announced, just as she sensed movement behind her. "The human has breached security protocols," announced a Meridian scout, crystalline form pulsing with alert patterns. "Capture it immediately," ordered Enk. 3 toric cadets moved to surround her position. Wren held up her hands, the universal gesture of surrender. "Before you turn me into a diplomatic incident," she said, "you might want to check your communication channels." The chamber's screens flickered to life, displaying live feeds from news sources across the galaxy. But unlike the carefully curated propaganda both sides had been consuming, these feeds showed the full, unfiltered reality of the emerging conflict, including civilian casualties on both sides and evidence of third-party agitators provoking hostilities. "I've accessed the Academy's deep space arrays," Wren explained, maintaining the calm, measured tone she'd learned from Commander Voss's crisis negotiation modules. "These aren't processed for political consumption. They're raw data streams showing what's actually happening." The screens showed toric civilian transports being evacuated from conflict zones with Meridian assistance, Meridian medical teams receiving supplies from toric military vessels, small acts of cooperation occurring even as official channels declared total war. "This facility contains the most sophisticated information-gathering network in 7 sectors," Wren continued. "Your leaders see filtered intelligence. You're seeing reality." She typed a final command, and the environmental systems stabilized. I have also unlocked the emergency medical protocols. Anyone injured can access treatment without factional interference. The chamber fell silent as students from both sides stared at the screens, then at each other, then at the unremarkable human standing before them. "How did you—" began Trill, crystalline structure shifting to a pattern Wren's translator identified as cognitive dissonance. "I didn't try to outthink your conflict," Wren said simply. "I just made sure everyone could see the same information at the same time, an old human diplomatic trick called transparency." Enk's scaled brow furrowed. "You risked termination to show us news feeds." "I risked it to show you that while your leaders are positioning for advantage, your people are already cooperating where it matters." She allowed herself a small smile. "The Academy taught us that information asymmetry is the primary cause of escalation in 93% of interstellar conflicts. Sometimes humans actually pay attention in class." The first Tauric cadet lowered his weapon, then another. Across the chamber, Meridian students began deactivating their defensive fields. The chamber's main doors hissed open 3 hours later when Academy security finally managed to override the lockdown protocols. A contingent of heavily armed peacekeepers stormed in, followed by a delegation of high-ranking administrators whose multiple appendages gesticulated in apparent alarm, only to freeze at the unexpected tableau before them. Instead of the anticipated carnage, they found students from rival factions huddled around communication terminals, engaged in heated but non-violent debate. Makeshift medical stations had been established where injured students received treatment regardless of species. At the central control hub stood Wren, looking exhausted but surprisingly authoritative as she mediated a discussion between Enk and Trill. "Direct communication channel between student representatives and regional commanders," she was saying. "Your families have political connections. Use them." Administrator Fleek's gelatinous mass pulsated with what might have been confusion. "What is the meaning of this?" "Temporary misunderstanding," Enk replied, his formal Tauric military posture at odds with his conciliatory tone. "The human has facilitated a cooperative information-sharing protocol." Trill's crystalline form shifted to a formal diplomatic configuration. "We have established verified communication channels with our respective authorities to correct intelligence discrepancies." The security chief, a grizzled Veldian whose exoskeleton bore the marks of previous conflicts, surveyed the scene with obvious suspicion. "You expect us to believe that after decades of hostility, you've suddenly decided to play nice because of a human student?" Wren stepped forward, looking far more confident than she felt. "With respect, Chief, I simply removed the information asymmetry that was fueling escalation. Both sides were operating on manipulated intelligence." From the back of the administrative delegation, a tall, leonine figure emerged. Ambassador Zor, the Academy's nominal director and a legendary diplomatic figure whose species was so ancient they'd allegedly witnessed the first interstellar treaties. The room fell silent as Zor surveyed the makeshift peace conference. "Explain," the ambassador commanded, fixing multifaceted eyes on Wren. She swallowed hard but maintained eye contact, a human gesture of respect that would have been a challenge display in some cultures. "The Academy's deep space arrays collect unfiltered data from across contested regions. I accessed those feeds and displayed them simultaneously to all factions. When everyone could see the same reality, including civilian cooperation already occurring despite political rhetoric, de-escalation became possible." "A primitive but effective approach," conceded a Meridian professor, light patterns suggesting reluctant admiration. "The human demonstrated tactical adaptability consistent with species that survived multiple extinction-level events," added Commander Voss, who had apparently been trapped in the chamber during the incident. "Improvised solutions using limited resources." Ambassador Zor circled Ren slowly. You interfered with a galactic conflict without authorization. I prevented my classmates from killing each other, she corrected, then added hastily, Ambassador, and established a direct back-channel between student representatives and their military commands. Trill volunteered unexpectedly, supportive. The carbon entity, the human, identified that our family's connections could bypass traditional diplomatic barriers. Enk nodded, scales flattening in a sign of toric respect. Information is now flowing without political filtration. 3 misattributed attacks have already been identified. A 48-hour ceasefire has been implemented to investigate other discrepancies. The assembled faculty exchanged glances of disbelief. Ambassador Zor's expression remained unreadable, but something like curiosity flickered across alien features. You created a diplomatic framework using academy resources, student connections, and transparency, the ambassador summarized, without formal training or authority. Ren shrugged, another human gesture that translated poorly across species. I used what I had. Humans are good at that. Indeed. Zor turned to address the gathering. This incident will require extensive review. All students will report for full debriefing. Security protocols will be reassessed. A pause. Curriculum adjustments may be warranted. As the peacekeepers began escorting students out, Ren found herself flanked by Enk and Trill, former adversaries now serving as unlikely allies. Your species' approach is unorthodox, Trill admitted, crystalline structure forming what Ren's translator suggested was a pattern of reappraisal. Humans lack our natural defenses, Enk observed, yet compensate through adaptive problem-solving, an evolutionary advantage we overlooked. Professor Yilk approached, 12 eyes blinking in apparent recalibration. Perhaps primitive artistic expression was not the appropriate recommendation for your studies. The Academy's diplomatic corps may benefit from alternative perspectives. As they exited the chamber, Ren noticed how other students regarded her, not with dismissal or condescension, but with something resembling respect. Even Administrator Fleek's gelatinous form seemed to bow slightly in her direction. Just a human, she murmured to herself with the ghost of a smile. But maybe that's not such a bad thing after all. 2 standard cycles later, the Academy's Grand Atrium hosted an unprecedented ceremony. The Galactic News Network called it the Diplomacy Arena Accords, the first student-led peace initiative to receive official recognition from major powers. Political analysts across 17 systems were still trying to process how juvenile hostilities in an educational facility had somehow produced a framework for de-escalation that seasoned diplomats had failed to achieve for decades. Ren stood uncomfortably in her newly issued diplomatic attire, a concession to her unexpected role as liaison between human educational methodologies and the Academy's curriculum committee. Her modified translator had been officially sanctioned, with several species requesting adaptation for their own use. Apparently, primitive pattern recognition had applications even advanced civilizations had overlooked. The human approach will be incorporated into standard conflict resolution protocols, announced Ambassador Zor, addressing the assembled dignitaries. Their evolutionary history of constant adaptation provides unique perspectives on multi-layered diplomatic challenges. Later, in the dining hall, where seating arrangements had been permanently adjusted to encourage cross-species interaction, Ren found herself at a table with representatives from 12 different worlds. "Is it true your species nearly destroyed itself multiple times?" asked a junior Javidian diplomat, fascination evident in their undulating appendages. "Several times," Ren confirmed. "We learned the hard way that survival often depends on cooperation." Kixir's feather scales shifted to a pattern of amused observation. Perhaps advanced civilizations become too specialized in their thinking. You still retain flexibility. A meridian representative emitted light patterns indicating formal respect, a far cry from the dismissive flickers of weeks earlier. The carbon entity's methods have been deemed worthy of further study. Even Enk, now serving as a Toric cultural attaché, acknowledged her contribution. Your species compensates for physical limitations with cognitive adaptability, a strategy we had not properly evaluated. As the gathering dispersed, Ren paused at one of the atrium's viewing portals, watching distant stars where tensions were gradually easing. The Academy's most senior xenopsychology professor glided to her side. "You know what's truly remarkable about humans," the ancient being observed. "Not that you're adaptable, many species are, that you're consistently underestimated until it's too late." Ren smiled. "Maybe that's our real evolutionary advantage." As she walked away, her translator caught a whispered conversation between two Academy administrators. "The Galactic Council is considering fast-tracking human membership after just 2 centuries of faster-than-light capability. Unprecedented. Perhaps necessary. Better to have them inside our diplomatic framework than operating outside it, especially after this demonstration. Just a human exchange student, until the galaxy realized that might be exactly what it needed."